What's up guys, Lifting here. We now have the skill tree available for us for patch 2.1, the upcoming Talisman League. And in this video I'm going to show you the changes that's going to happen to the skill tree. It will not be a discussion of the changes. I will save that for a later video that I will upload either later today or tomorrow. We'll see about that. So this will simply be an illustration of the changes that are to come. And we're going to start with the Shadow starting area that has received some major changes, and then move on to the Ranger starting changes, and then Scion eventually. And then finally we're going to talk about some general changes that is happening throughout the entire skill tree. So let's get started. One of the major changes that has happened to the Shadow tree is that the starting nodes here, they no longer just provide increased physical damage. They now give you increased physical damage plus increased chaos damage. So that's pretty interesting. This upcoming patch we're going to see is in general going to add a lot of chaos and poison damage to the skill tree. And it has been speculated that the Shadow is probably going to be the main class when it comes to poisons and chaos damage, but that's not too surprising. It's pretty thematic, right? Another thing that has happened here in the Shadow tree is that Blood Siphon has been nerfed together with its corresponding skill nodes here. These used to give 6% increased life, and Blood Siphon used to give 12% increased maximum life. So a total of 4% less total life in this cluster, which is actually a pretty significant nerf. And then as you can see, this entire new area down here is actually consisting of old and one new notable. We have Entropy, which remain unchanged, except for that it now has 5% increased skill effect duration, and the corresponding nodes give 10% increased damage over time. This is a small nerf compared to the old Entropy cluster that was up here. I believe it's like 2% extra damage or something like that. We also have Sleight of Hand, provides the same stats or bonuses, but it has been moved obviously. And then we have Will of Blades, which is a new notable that gives 20% increased physical damage and 20% increased critical strike chance. Another major change you may have noticed is that the elemental specializations is gone. Before you could spec into fire, cold and lightning and give either shock chains, chance to freeze, or a chance to ignite. Now instead we have elemental focus together with the elemental damage nodes here. Elemental focus gives you 10% chance to avoid elemental status ailments, increased duration of elemental status ailments on enemies, and increased elemental damage. And then you have the good old Assassination notable here. One thing to note here is that Assassination before had 2 additional of these critical strike chains nodes. So there was 4 of these in total together with Assassination. So this could potentially mean that we have lost 40% critical strike chains in this part of the skill tree. However, one should also keep in mind that we're gaining 20% critical strike chains from Will of Blades. However, you would probably not pick this up if you were to go for a spellcaster build at least. And now down here we had the old Quickness, which has been renamed and changed into Fangs of the Viper. And the only thing that has changed is that it now gives a nice 20% increased chaos damage. The increased physical damage, movement speed and dexterity remains unchanged. And then above us we have Nullification, which now gives a 5% increased maximum life as well. And this is kind of interesting. I suppose this is for people who want to do a hybrid evasion, energy shield, and potentially life build. Because to get to this notable, you'll have to pick up evasion and energy shield nodes. So yeah, I don't know about that, but it's kind of interesting. And to the left of this, we have Sniper, the good old Sniper, which used to be down here near Sleight of Hand. Sniper remains unchanged, it's still the same stats. And then together with a long range of other buffs to mines and traps, we have Saboteur that now gives 30% increased trap and mine damage, whereas before it was only 20%. We're going to take a look at the mines and trap changes a bit more in depth later on, but I felt like this was part of the Shadow tree, so I wanted to show you guys here. But this is one of the changes that Saboteur has received. Then over here we have Adder's Touch, and Adder's Touch has been nerfed in the sense that previously it had a 100% chance when striking an enemy with a dagger to poison the enemy. Now it's only 30% chance to poison the enemy, which is actually a very significant nerf. And together with the other poison changes, Growth and Decay has been added to the skill tree. It gives 20% increased damage over time and 1% of life regenerated per second. And at the same time as Growth and Decay has been added, they have removed Corruption, which used to be somewhere over here. And then another pretty cool thing they have added to the skill tree here is the Atrophy notable and the Force Shaper notable. The Atrophy notable gives you 25% increased chaos damage, 4% increased cast speed with chaos skills, and 8% chaos resistance. And the skill notes give you chaos damage. Then the first one gives physical and chaos damage. And Force Shaper, as you can see here, gives you 25% increased physical damage and then 5% of physical damage as extra chaos damage. And that's, of course, pretty interesting. And the skill notes here simply gives you increased physical damage. Pretty cool. And now for the two last changes in the Shadow starting area is Method to the Madness. It gives you 22% increased chaos damage and 8% chaos resistance. The changes to this cluster is that the skill notes close to Method to the Madness gives you more chaos damage now, whereas these before were 7%, it's now 12%. This was 5 before, I believe, and now as you can see it's 8. The chaos resistance it provides has been reduced a bit though. I can't remember what these was, but it is a little less than what it previously was. And the last thing in the Shadow Tree is Fatal Toxins, and it's pretty cool just because it says 100% increased damage with poison. That is a significant increase, and the skill notes gives you 10% chance to poison on hit and 25% increased damage with poison. So a total of 125% increased damage with poison. It's not more, but it's increased damage with poison. It's pretty cool though. I like this skill cluster. And now let's move down into the Ranger starting area and take a look at the changes that has been happening to this class, or the starting zone at least. And the first thing you'll notice is that the 8% increased attack speed skill note, which I love by the way, has been changed to 16% increased projectile damage. The 20% increased accuracy has also been removed and now gives 4% increased attack speed and 10% increased projectile damage. And if you look at these, you can see this is projectile damage and we have 4% increased attack speed notes here. Ballistic Mastery remains the same, but we have also seen one skill note that has been removed in order to gain access to Aspect of the Eagle. And Aspect of the Eagle remains unchanged. It looks very different, but this cluster is actually very similar to what it was previously. It's still 3% increased attack speed with bows and some critical strike chains. You have to spend 2 points and then you'll be able to exit the tree. The major change is that you no longer is able to exit this direction. You are exiting in this direction over here. And these still give 15% increased bow damage. It should be said though that the skill note here has been buffed slightly. It used to be 6 and 2% attack speed with bow, so nothing significant. The other starting route for the Ranger remains unchanged as far as I can see. It's still life and evasion, there's some physical damage here and there's some attack speed. Finesse remains the same. Heart of the Oak has changed a bit, whereas it before was 30% chance to avoid being stunned. It's now 20% increased stun recovery and 20% chance to avoid being stunned. Together with the remaining and unchanged 8% increased maximum life and life regenerated per second. The same goes for Primal Spirit, remains unchanged. Oh, and it should be said that the 4% increased attack speed here is of course a buff. This used to be 3% increased attack speed, so a total of 3% increased attack speed if you go in this route, which is actually a significant change. And now, as you can obviously see, Aspect of the Panther and Precise Interception has been changed, or the entire layout of the area has been changed where these two notables were. Aspect of the Panther now grants you 2% additional block chains while dual wielding. It didn't do that before. Previously it gave you 4% increased movement speed. The other stats remain unchanged for Aspect of the Panther, however. As for Precise Interception, it now has 15% increased physical damage while holding a shield added to it, which basically makes it more efficient. As you guys can see, there has been some trimming of the skill notes surrounding these two notables here. So basically what they've done in this part of the skill tree, guys, is that they have merged some of the previous skill notes that were here, trimmed them down, and then added a bit to these notables, making the area more efficient. And then you can see Weapon Mastery, who previously used to be in the middle of aspect of the Panther and precise interception has been moved up here. It gives 2% additional block chains while dual wielding, 16% increased physical damage with attacks, and 4% increased attack speed. The changes here is that the strength and dexterity, as you can see, it gives 10 plus to each now, whereas it before was just 20 plus to dexterity. And it now has the 16% increased physical damage with attacks, whereas before it was 20% increased physical damage with melee attacks. So this means now that you can actually efficiently pick up this notable, even though you're not using melee attack weapons. Pretty cool. And then we of course have the newly added aspect of the links that gives you 16% increased physical damage with attacks, 4% increased movement speed, 20% increased critical strike chains, and 10% or 10 plus to dexterity and intelligence. So pretty awesome, very efficient notable. And now the last thing for the Ranger specifically we're going to talk about is the merge of Essence Sap, who used to be somewhat down here. You can see these are new changes as well. We're going to talk about these as well. But Essence Sap has been merged with Spirit Void, and it's now called Essence Sap. And previously, this Spirit Void cluster would give you 0.4 of attack damage leached as mana. It's now 0.6, and it would give you a 15% increased mana leached per second, whereas this is now 20. So a pretty nice change, especially because you really didn't pick this up too often, and Spirit Void is nice, but it's now even better, right? Essence Sap is pretty awesome. And so before we actually start talking about this, let's talk about some of the scion changes that has been made to the game as well, or will be made to the game with the patch launch. And that is that the scion has been nerfed, guys. The scion has been nerfed. And the scion has the most terrible starting notes, but some of these have actually been nerfed even further. However, there is a very clear reason to this, and that is these three notes here, and that's the dual sockets. And if you guys have been playing Path of Exile for some time, you know that scion has become, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases it's become the go-to class if you want to take a character to really late game, because you can find some very powerful duels, and these duels can make up, more than up, for the weak starting notes. So in order to combat that, I'm pretty sure that GGG has nerfed some of these notes to, well, make it less attractive to start as the scion. So let me show you which ones has been nerfed. So if we look at the life regeneration notes here, for instance, these used to be 0.4, like this one, and then 0.4. So the two life regen notes here has been nerfed slightly. And it doesn't look like much, but it actually makes a difference if you're relying on a build with a lot of life regeneration. Shaper remains unchanged. And then probably the major change is that the projectile damage notes down here has been nerfed from 8% to 6%, all three of them. And then lastly, the spell damage note up here has been nerfed a bit as well. It used to be 10%, now it's 8%. The 6%ers here remain the same, and the attack speed ones remain the same as well. And then over here we have Harrier, which has been reduced. It previously was 10.6.6, now it's 9.5.5. And I'm so sad to see that. Harrier was one of my favorite notables, but it makes sense, It's still pretty awesome. Another thing that has changed in the scion starting area is that the area of effect nodes here have changed. These are now 5, 5, and 10, whereas they used to be 4, 4, 4. So we've lost 2% increased radius of area skills, but we've gained some damage with the skills, 10% increased with area skills. And this is actually quite universal for the skill tree. We see the same thing up here near the Templar. These are now 5, 5, and 5. But also 20% increased area damage. These used to be 4 or 8, 4, 4. So again, we lose a bit of area of effects, but we gain some more area damage. It's the same thing that happens up here near the Witch. If we take a look at blast radius, this is 5% increased radius of area skills. This used to be 8. Then we have 5% increased here. This used to be 4. This used to be 4. And then we used to have one that gave us 4 as well, but this is now 10% increased area damage. So we're actually gaining some more area damage again at the cost of area of effect. And the same goes actually, only slightly though, but for explosive impact over here. This used to be 4% increased radius of area skills. And now I believe versatility has also received a slight change. Versatility now grants you 4% increased attack speed, whereas it didn't do that before, as far as I remember. The duelist leech has been changed. You can see that these nodes are now attack damage leeched as life. This is again attack damage. We now have Spirit Void here, which is somewhat closer to the old Essence Sap, but they switched places for some reason and stats. And then we have Life Leech over here together with Vitality Void. And that's 0.8 of attack damage leeched as life, 5% increased maximum life per second to maximum life leech rate, and 20% increased life leech per second. And the important thing to note here, guys, is that these nodes give attack damage leeched as life. I know I said this a few times, but this is the important part. Whereas it's not physical attack damage. This means that if you are playing a build that uses elemental attacks, for instance Ice Crash or Static Strike, things like this, these will now fully benefit from the leech percentage, whereas before that it would only be the physical part of the attack that would actually give you or allow you to leech back. This is a huge change, very, very significant. But we will of course have to see if some of the numbers still have to be tweaked or something like that. We don't know if Leech is going to be good yet, but this is definitely a step in the right direction, making it much more interesting playing hybrid elemental attack builds or elemental attack builds for that matter. So pretty cool, I like this. And now while we're down here, we can see that Bloodletting has been replaced by Dirty Techniques. Bloodletting previously gave 24% increased physical damage over time and 20% increased attack damage against bleeding targets. Dirty Techniques instead adds 40% increased damage over time, 10% increased skill effect duration, and 25% chance to poison on hit against bleeding enemies. Oh, and there hasn't really been any Marauder changes, but there is a slight change to Warrior's Blood, and that is the 20% increased stun threshold that has been added to it. And then if we go up here taking a look at the witch part of the tree, Elemental Dominion is now called Occultist Dominion. So instead of giving 16% increased elemental damage with spells, it now gives you 16% increased spell damage, together with the unchanged 4% increased cast speed and 20 plus to intelligence. And now finally, let's talk about the mines and trap changes. We already talked a bit about Saboteur that has received a buff, but we also have an entirely new cluster being added, Destructive Apparatus. 25% increased mine damage, 15% increased mine duration, and 8% increased mine laying speed together with the skill nodes here that kind of gives the same and damage. Then we have Volatile Mines, which now has the 5% increased radius of area skills, and the damage has been increased by 10%. It was previously 20% increased mine damage. And then if we scroll a bit further down, we have Unstable Munitions, 24% increased trap damage and 5% increased radius of area skills. Again, pretty nice. We also know that Master Sapper has been changed. It now gives 30% increased trap damage up from 24, and you can set 2 additional traps. It has also added 10% increased trap trigger radius. If we go up to High Explosives, we can see that it has a 10% increased trap trigger radius and a 10% increased mine detonation radius. And Clever Construction has also received 20% increased trap damage and mine damage. Pretty awesome. And then for the final change for mines and traps is that Hasty Reconstruction now gives you 20% increased trap damage and 20% increased cooldown recovery speed for throwing traps. So basically this works by reducing the time where your traps regenerate, allowing you to cast more traps within a certain time limit. So pretty awesome. And those are the changes that we so far have been able to observe, guys. If you have noticed any other changes that I haven't mentioned in this video, do me the favor of letting me know down in the comments. I'm sure everyone would appreciate that. There's been a lot of changes. Some of them are fairly subtle. Some of them are definitely going to have a very solid impact on the game. The poison changes, the chaos changes are very, very pronounced. The mine changes are very pronounced. But anyway, I hope it was of use. Remember to check the discussion I'll be posting later. I'll be doing the discussion with Project PT, and Hegemony will be doing it as a podcast. So make sure you guys check that out if you want to hear our opinions on the skill tree more in depth. So with that said, remember to subscribe for more Path of Exile content on this channel. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?